Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. Let's talk about Richard Bandler, the NLP co-founder. This video is going to be me taking an in-depth look into what I perceive to be the strengths and weaknesses of his version of NLP. I'm going to talk about my particular experiences with Richard Bandler's teachings and my experience with applying Richard Bandler's teachings with clients professionally for the last 23 years. So let's look at some of the strengths to begin with. First of all, I have to say that I deeply appreciate Richard Bandler's contributions. I think he's a genius, and I think that his work is very underappreciated in the world of psychology and change work. So Richard, in my opinion, brings quite a few things to the table. And I would say the first thing that's a huge strength with Bandler is just his infectious optimism and sense that change really is possible. And he backs it up. If you want to look at an excellent demonstration of Bandler at his best, I highly recommend that you get the DVDs called the Marshall University tapes and complement it with the book called Magic in Action. The Magic in Action book is, for the most part, the transcripts of the sessions that he does in the Marshall University tapes. This is from the early 80s, where Bandler gets 3 clients in a studio cold. He has no prior information about these people. And these are people with claustrophobias, phobias, anxieties, panic attacks. And he works, I think, for about 30 minutes with each of them. And there's a follow-up interview 8 months later. And I mean, he's lucky. He's lucky in this particular case, but he's also extremely skilled. All of them had made profound changes in one 30-minute session. It's not as unheard of today in 2021, but in the 80s, the fact that you could help someone with those sorts of problems that quickly was pretty much unheard of. Not only that, but that he had a structure, that he had very specific strategies and processes that he could use and that he could help other people to consistently use. That was also pretty unheard of. Of course, in NLP, there's a strong emphasis on that the map is not the territory. Specifically, that most of our limitations are not due to the world or the territory in and of itself, but it's more how we represent things to ourselves. So when you do NLP change work, and by the way, my critique here is exclusively going to be not about modeling or teaching or anything like that, but only change work, whether it's change work with clients or self-application. So Bandler did a really good job in helping people to see that the main limitations lied in the maps that they were using. And another very big strength in NLP was the whole notion that what people call depression and phobias and anxiety and stuff like that sounds like a thing. Bandler would frame it as depressing or phobicking or anxietizing. Not that he necessarily used those words, but he would frame it as activities, as processes, as something that the person was doing, and the idea that the person could learn to do something else. A non-pathological approach instead of viewing people as broken, defective, or suffering from some sort of disease, he would help people to see it as no, this is this is a process. This is something that you're doing, and you can learn to do something different. So that was also huge at the time. Another thing where I think that the world hasn't quite caught on is that Bandler did a great job in emphasizing speed. That change often, not always, but often can happen very quickly. Now, you could make the argument that when a change happens, it always happens quickly. But when I say quickly here, I mean like in a session, in one session or in two sessions, people can make tremendous shifts. And Bandler got very famous for these 5-minute phobia shifts, where he would get people on stage and in a matter of minutes, often help them change a strong phobic response. So the whole notion of speed, that change can happen quickly, is something I think that Bandler, to a large extent, pioneered, at least to a degree that I haven't really seen anyone else do it. Of course, Milton Erickson had a lot of quick changes with some of his clients, but I don't think he emphasized speed in the way that Bandler did. And Bandler, so if you look at the way he framed work with phobias, for example, he would very often tell people something along the lines of, there's nothing wrong with you. You have photographic memory. You have the capacity for one trial learning, meaning many of these clients might have had one really bad experience, around a dog or on a plane or something like that. And after that, they've consistently remembered to be phobic every time they're in the same environment since then, whether it's raining or snowing or their wife is in a good mood or a bad mood, like they always remember to do it, perhaps 20 years later. He would frame this as an accomplishment, as like, what a skill, what an amazing capacity you have to learn and to do one trial learning. And use that as an argument that, look, if you learn to be phobic in a matter of seconds or minutes, why should learning something else take months or years of therapy? And he would also very often say, look, there's nothing wrong with you. You work perfectly, meaning if every time you go up on stage, you choke up, for example, or you freeze, if that happens every time, that works perfectly. It doesn't work the way you want it to work, but it works perfectly as a process. In the fact that it's consistent. So another thing, so the work he did with phobias and things like compulsions really, really fast is really worth looking at. There's gold in that. Also, the use of humor. I mean, I've been to quite a few Bandler seminars. To me, he's funnier than the vast majority of comedians I've listened to. That also might have something to do with the fact that I think he has some profound insights about, human psychology and human beings that most comedians probably don't at the level that he has. But his skill in kind of exposing paradoxes and making fun of problems and the human condition. As he often would say, as soon as someone can laugh at something, they can change it. So the way he used humor, the way he got clients to laugh at their own issues, I've seen others. I mean, Milton Erickson, again, had an emphasis sometimes on humor. People like Frank Farrelly of provocative therapy fame, Of course, also had a strong emphasis on using humor with clients. But I think Bandler really, really mastered it and did a great job of utilizing humor with clients. So, you know, for that reason too, it's really worth studying his tapes, studying his DVDs, watching him work, and see how he does that stuff. It's really, really impactful. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, a sense of outrageousness and a sense of wildness. If you look at quite a few of the stunts that he did with clients, the outrageousness, again, the humor, the non-political correctness. Um, Very often, when it comes to people who are particularly stuck, it's the wild, crazy agents of change who often can leverage things in a way that inspires clients to move or to change or to do something different. Another thing I appreciate about Bandler is the fact that he never came across as a nice or a warm or particularly caring human being, meaning the stereotype that most people have of what a good therapist should be like as a human being. I have to say here, I don't know Bandler. I don't know how he lives his life. I've never spent time with him, so I can't really know. But he's clearly a guy who has had his fair share of demons, so to speak, and a bit like a wounded healer in many ways. A troubled person who's also very brilliant. So I think somewhat ironically that might give some hope to a lot of people that they might be good at helping people despite not being quote unquote perfect human beings themselves. I think Bandler also, I mean, when you look at the guy, at least when I attended his seminars, he was quite overweight. He had health challenges. He clearly had some antisocial tendencies. Many of his relationships with other people had gone sore. He did not seem like a guy necessarily whose life you would want to trade with, but he was simultaneously extremely effective with many clients and very innovative. And there's something about that I think is a little bit cool. Now, let's look at some of the weaknesses, or what I perceive to be weaknesses with Bandler's approach when it comes to client work and self-application. And I think that there are quite a few. So one of them is he does not seem to admit to mistakes or screw-ups at all. And that's not good. It instills in students a kind of perfectionistic, absolutistic, dishonest attitude where admitting to failure and screw-ups becomes a taboo, and it stifles everyone who buys into it. So, as an example, in books and in interviews, he said that he's never failed with a client with the phobia cure. I know this to be bullshit. I've personally watched people he has had on stage who he has done that with and who I have spoken to after the fact, and there's been no change. So he's just not being honest about that. And there's this, at least in 2021, there's this clip on YouTube called The Hypnotist, Richard Bandler, where he does work with a person, and that work does not seem necessarily very successful. It seems very muddy, it seems challenging. The person still seems to be a bit afraid. And that's often how sessions in the real world are. They're not always completely successful. They're not always necessarily easy. That's how quite a few of my sessions look too, in the real world. That's not a problem. The problem is that when you read Richard's books, when you attend his seminars, at least the ones I've been to, and you watch his DVDs, you get presented this utopian world where that stuff never happens. So that's a very, very big drawback of not being able to really admit to mistakes, clients not changing or clients just changing a little bit. There's really no troubleshooting. So I'll give an example of this. In most of his book, the classic NLP VK dissociation or phobia cure process is mentioned. There's never a troubleshooting tip, meaning what do you do if someone can't quite follow the instructions, or if someone seems to do it but they still don't quite change? Where do you go? Like, there's virtually no troubleshooting. Now, you could make the argument that his spinning feelings technique is one form of troubleshooting, but there's not really any troubleshooting of what you do if the client can't really pull that off either, So one thing I discovered when I first trained NLP, and this was when I went to Tad James's courses, and Tad James was very influenced by Bandler, was that the trainers did not by coincidence select the demo subjects that they would choose to do the various patterns with. They would look for people who had a few things in common, and I discovered that they were the ability to visualize in consciousness. People who were good at that, good at knowing that and adjusting that. People who had good VK synesthesias, meaning that they could make imagery and then in an emotional or kinesthetic way respond to it well. People who were good at going into states. People who were good at absorption and who then had some hypnotic capacity. If your client is relatively good at those things, you can look amazing on stage doing the classic submodality, anchoring, type formats with suggestion artistry. It's going to look dramatic. It's going to look good. But if the client doesn't quite have those capacities well developed, you're likely going to strike out. And I've never heard anything in his books or in his seminars of what do you do, when you encounter these sorts of clients. I remember after having done a lot of training with Tad James, for example, in California, I went home to Norway and I got a lot of the types of clients who would not be chosen as demo subjects in the training room. And I had no idea how to adapt or how to troubleshoot. I hardly even had the idea that people wouldn't respond like that, because the opposite was the only thing that I had been exposed to. So this is also, I think, a big limitation. Let's see what else we have here. Very little emphasis on physiology. Breathing, for example, breathing patterns. There's a lot you can do with proper breathing and movement and these sorts of things. Now, I know that Richard has modeled Feldenkrais back in the day, but in his books and in the seminars I've been to and in the DVDs I've seen, I've virtually everything I've seen has been about changing your representations and really nothing about stuff like breathing or physiology or stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff to explore in that realm. Something else too, very little emphasis on ethics, very little emphasis on wisdom or being wise with your skills and utilizing it in an ethical way. There's often more a tendency to joke about those things as if they're kind of naive or nothing to really be bothered with. But the more time I've spent in this industry, the more I've seen that's a shortcoming. And I think that's reflected in the so-called NLP community. If you see how people relate to each other in the NLP world, you'll see, I think you'll see one consequence there of ethics and wisdom not quite being emphasized. Another big weakness, I think, with Bandler's work is that so much of it seems to be reduced to techniques and processes. There's very little emphasis on contextual factors, relationship factors, situational factors, how people understand the role that they're in. And I highly recommend taking a look at the work, for example, of someone like Nicholas Spanos and the work he did on hypnosis. And you'll see, you'll get some insight into how important those factors are. So, for example, when Bandler does his magical stuff on stage, people have a tendency to attribute all of it to the techniques and to Bandler's state, and to not look at all the social psychology and contextual factors that go into the mix. I think that's also a big limitation in how he does NLP. Something else too, there's very little emphasis in how to change your relationship to your thoughts and your feelings, to relate to them in a more accepting, more wise, more skillful way, as is often emphasized in various meditation traditions. There's little emphasis on constant self-application, as in having a meditation practice to cultivate certain skills and certain insights. Of course, I've never seen Bandler talk about the illusion, the self illusion, that there being no such thing as a self. That's the only limit, the only counterexample I've seen to that, I think, in the kind of strict NLP world is Connie Ray Andreas and her wholeness approach. And finally, I would say that some of Bandler's kind of antisocial personality tendencies. I mean, look, when I talk about strengths and weaknesses as if they are two distinct things, that's a trap. You might want to look for the strengths in the weaknesses and the weaknesses in the strengths. So, for example, the whole emphasis on speed and how change can happen quickly has, for many NLPers, become this kind of absolutist idea that change has to happen quickly. And if it doesn't, what the hell are you doing wrong? So I think that some of Bandler's personality tendencies, the outrageousness, the wildness, these sorts of things, huge strengths, huge strengths in enabling him to be as innovative and to be as effective, as he has been. It also seems as if those tendencies are a bit unbalanced. So I'll give you a personal example. I attended a seminar with him in 2006 where he spent 90 minutes of the first day, this was in Switzerland, really bashing anyone who hadn't trained with him, and said that anyone who hadn't trained with him was just stuck in various levels of his development. And spent a lot of time talking about how anyone who hadn't trained with him and was a trainer was not competent, and shouldn't be teaching and probably shouldn't be doing anything with this stuff, and how the FBI was building, files on people who were doing this without permission, and so on and so forth. And then after almost 90 minutes of this, of paid seminar time, he proposes to the audience that if you send me your trainer's diplomas that I can use in future court cases, I will write you a trainer's diploma, with my name and my stamp on it. And no one reacted to that except me, at least not overtly. So I challenged him and I said, Richard, if the topic here is competency, and you offer to sign someone a diploma with your name on it without either testing for competency or doing something to improve the person's competency, what on earth is that? And he was like, who the fuck are you? I was like, well, I'm a seminar attendee. I'm paying for this, hoping to get something out of this. And he did not, in my opinion, handle that particular challenge very well. And I think that and many other instances reveals something of his ethics, I think, that I think are lacking. So that's my take on Richard Bandler and his teachings and his claims. I'd love to hear your experiences, your opinions, what you think, where you agree, where you disagree. Please leave it in the comments so we can have an interesting discussion about this. I highly recommend checking out Bandler's work. As I said, the Marshall University tapes and the book Magic in Action are favorites of mine. I want to say too that I'm doing a seminar in September 2021. It's going to be September 25th and 26th that weekend. It's hosted by aetherandalchemy.net, or you can go to my website, provocativehypnosis.com, and get the information. You also see it in the link of the video. It's hosted by Pete Dalton in Birmingham, and it's going to be about the psychological illusion model to hypnosis and change work that I teach. So I really hope to see you there. Thanks for listening.